They thought they buried me, but I was the soil. My name is Adrian Keane. I'm 30 years old. For the past 8 years, I served as Director of Strategic Finance at Altair & Company, a company my father built from the ground up in Midtown Manhattan. Quiet, consistent, relentless. That's how people described me, at least the ones who paid attention. Most didn't, especially not the people in charge. They only noticed when things went wrong. And with me, things rarely did. I didn't crave attention. I didn't fight for the spotlight. But I knew every number behind the company's rise. I built systems that saved millions. I managed teams that never missed a target. And in the end, none of that mattered. Because I wasn't loud. Because I didn't lead like them. Because I didn't look like power. I was halfway through reviewing the quarterly projections when Colin Drake walked into my office without knocking. No greeting, no hesitation. Just a file thrown onto my desk like it didn't belong there. "Adrian," he said, voice sharp. "We need to talk, now." I glanced at the folder, then at the man I'd worked under for 4 years. Colin was the type of executive who never made eye contact unless he wanted something. Coffee, compliance, control. He loved power, and even more, he loved reminding you he had it. "Of course," I said, motioning to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. He stood looming like a final judgment. "The board's decided to restructure the leadership team," he began. "We're moving in a different direction. And frankly, we need people who can lead, not just manage spreadsheets." I blinked once, no reaction, no surprise. "You're firing me," I said calmly. Colin smirked like he'd won something.
"Let's not be dramatic," he said. "We're releasing you from your position effective immediately."
No warning, no review, no mention that my division had delivered the company's highest revenue growth in 3 years. "I see," I said. He studied me, waiting for a reaction, anger, confusion, maybe even pleading. I gave him none of it. "May I ask why?" I said. He leaned in slightly, voice clipped. "You lack executive vision. You manage tasks, not people. And let's be honest, this industry rewards bold leadership, assertiveness, confidence, traits you haven't exactly demonstrated." There it was, dressed up in corporate vocabulary but not subtle at all. Colin didn't see me as a leader, not because I hadn't delivered, but because I didn't fit the mold he was comfortable with. "I understand," I said. My voice didn't shake. That threw him. "You'll need to return your badge and laptop by 5. Your access will be disabled," he said. "HR has your severance paperwork." I stood, extended my hand. "Thank you, Colin. I appreciate the clarity." He paused, hesitated, then shook it. "Good luck out there," he said as he turned and walked out. I sat back down. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. If anything, I felt lighter. Because what Colin didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that I wasn't just a department head. 2 weeks ago, everything changed. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, my father smiling proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of Altair & Co.'s first office. "You told me to wait, Dad," I whispered. "Wait until the time was right." I stood and began packing. I didn't take much. Just a few notebooks filled with unused ideas, a mug from last Christmas, a pen my father had given me. Outside, the office was quiet with speculation. Some coworkers gave me polite nods. Others avoided my eyes. No one asked anything, but I saw it in their faces. Did he get fired? What happened? I walked out of that building with a small smile, not a mask, a signal. They thought they ended my career. But what they really gave me was the green light. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to William Crane, our family attorney for over 2 decades. "It's time. Prepare everything." His reply came within seconds. "Understood. Shareholder meeting can be scheduled within 5 business days." I looked back at the glass tower behind me. Colin thought it was over, but he had no idea what was coming. Next time I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an employee. It would be as their majority shareholder. And the smile I wore that day? That one would be real. He didn't just leave me a legacy. He left me a weapon. 2 weeks before Colin fired me, I sat in a quiet, wood-paneled office with William Crane, my father's attorney. William had known me since I was a kid, always dressed in charcoal suits and kindness. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never had to. That day, he slid an envelope across his polished desk, thick paper gold seal, handwritten label to Adrian on your 30th birthday. Your father left very specific instructions, William said. You're not to open this until the exact day you turn 30, not a minute earlier. I half smiled. Some kind of delayed birthday card. He looked at me in that way lawyers do when they know everything but won't say a word. Your father believed in timing. He said some things need to feel significant. This was one of them. He trusted you more than anyone. That sentence stuck with me in the days that followed. My father, Michael Keane, founder and former CEO of Altair & Company, wasn't a sentimental man. He was structured, disciplined, strategic. But he always believed in symbols, moments that marked shifts, thresholds, new eras. When he died 5 years ago, the company changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. The values he built it on, integrity, loyalty, clarity, were replaced by buzzwords, shortcuts, and politics. Colin Drake joined the firm about a year after my father passed. MBA shine, designer suits, big talk about modernization and agile transformation. The board loved him. I saw through him in a week. I stayed hoping I could protect what was left. Hoping merit still mattered. It didn't. On the morning of my 30th birthday, I sat alone at my father's favorite spot in my apartment, a sunlit chair by the window, the city stretching out behind me, and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a legal document embossed with seals. The letter was handwritten in my father's neat, precise script. Adrian, if you're reading this, you've turned 30. That means you're ready. I never doubted it. Not once. You've spent your life working twice as hard for half the credit. I saw it even when you thought I didn't. I saw the late nights, the restraint, the consistency. I also saw what the company became after I left. And I knew eventually you'd need more than a seat at the table. So I gave you the table. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the second sheet. It was a trust agreement, legal binding, signed and notarized. According to the trust, 90% of the company's founder shares stock my father had retained when he stepped down were transferred to me. The clause was clear ownership and full voting rights activated on my 30th birthday. 90%.
I read it again, then a fourth time.
I wasn't just a shareholder. I was the majority owner. I felt it like a pulse beneath my skin power, but not the ego kind. It was quiet, solid. Like the weight of a sword you're finally allowed to carry. I called William immediately. Is this real? I asked, barely able to get the words out. Yes, he replied, calm and steady. Your father structured the trust to avoid public filings. It's airtight. No one on the board knows unless you tell them. Why didn't he activate it sooner? He wanted you to experience the company on your own first, to see who showed their true colors, to decide if you wanted it before you used it. That hit harder than I expected. I had spent years watching Colin take credit for my ideas, watching louder men rise faster, watching people like me, quiet builders, get passed over again and again. I thought patience would be enough. It wasn't patience I was missing. It was leverage. Now I had it. I scheduled a follow-up with William for the next day. We need to prepare for a shareholder meeting, I said. Are you sure you're ready to use this? He asked. I'm not using it for revenge, I said. I'm using it for correction. He didn't ask again. That evening I stood in front of my mirror wearing a navy suit I'd kept for something important. It still had the tags on. I adjusted the tie, practiced the lines I'd say, and watched my own face calm, sharp, unshaken. Leadership doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it whispers, and people still hear it. I looked out the window, watching the rush of cabs and late trains and glowing windows in Midtown. Below that skyline, decisions were made every day that affected lives. I was about to make one of them. Colin thought I walked out in silence. He had no idea I was walking towards something. Next time I entered that building, I wouldn't be dismissed. I'd be in control. The company wasn't stolen. It was drifting. And now I was ready to steer it home. They thought I was just a number guy, but numbers built this place. And I was the one who remembered why. The day after opening the letter, I met William Crane again, this time not as a son, but as a silent majority. We sat in the same office, same polished wood, but everything felt different. He slid a thick binder across the desk. Your father prepared everything he said. The shares are registered. Voting rights are active. You don't need the board's approval to call a special meeting. Just your signature. I flipped the binder open. I didn't need to read the whole thing. I trusted my father's attention to detail. And William's. Still, the weight of it was real. The kind of weight that came with responsibility, not just ownership. We'll submit the notice to the board on Friday, William continued. The meeting will be Tuesday. Good, I said. You want to walk them into the fire before they know it's burning. I gave a small nod. Not out of cruelty, out of strategy. In war, timing is everything. This wasn't revenge. This was precision. That night, I pulled out a different kind of binder, the one I'd built over years in silence. Ideas, policies, leadership strategies, people-first models, notes on team dynamics. All of it dismissed by Colin. All of it mine. I remembered the day he said, "We're not running a charity, Adrian. We need results." What he never understood was that people are the result. Take care of them, and the rest follows. Colin didn't believe in that, but my father did. And so did I. I spent the weekend revisiting the numbers. Not just the top-line revenue Colin liked to wave in front of the board. I dug deeper: retention rates, customer complaints, internal surveys, burnout metrics. The deeper I went, the worse it looked. Revenue had flatlined despite a booming market. Turnover was rising, especially among middle managers and technical staff. Employee satisfaction was down 38% in 2 years. There were 3 pending discrimination complaints buried under legal reviews. All under Colin's watch. I didn't need to manipulate anything. The numbers told the truth. They always do. And they weren't on his side. By Monday morning, rumors were already circling. I hadn't shown up for my exit interview. HR called twice. I didn't answer. People started whispering in Slack channels and behind glass doors. What happened to Adrian? Is he suing? Is he coming back? I let the silence build. Let them underestimate me one last time. Meanwhile, I met with Julia Myers, the trustee who had managed my father's shares until the transfer. She was sharp, dry, and spoke like every word was expensive. "I've watched that man dismantle your father's legacy brick by brick," she said, placing a folder in front of me. "You don't owe him politeness." Inside the folder were all the internal reports I needed. Julie had been documenting everything. Overspending on executive perks, misuse of company travel funds, aggressive hiring of underqualified personal connections. It was all there. "He's not just failing," Julia said. "He's hiding it." "I won't need to accuse him," I replied. "The truth will do that for me." I left her office with the documents under one arm and clarity in my chest. The walk back to my apartment was quiet. New York buzzed around me, but my mind was still, focused. I passed a mural in the lobby, an old painting of my father standing in front of the first Altair office, hand resting on my shoulder. I was 5 years old in that photo. Red jacket, big grin. No idea what the future held, but I knew now. This company was never meant to be a machine. It was meant to be a vessel for people, for progress, for something more than quarterly wins. Colin turned it into a ladder, one he climbed on top of while stepping over anyone who didn't shout loud enough to be heard. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to show up, and I was ready. They built a system where people like me never reached the top. My father built a back door, and now I had the key. They saw a number cruncher. What they never saw was the architect behind their most stable foundation. When Altair and Company moved into its new Manhattan headquarters 5 years ago, I was the one who redesigned the budgeting systems from the ground up. They called it a modernization initiative, but I called it survival. We had grown too fast. Our infrastructure was cracked beneath the surface. No one noticed except me. I stayed late. I worked weekends. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I saw the cracks and I couldn't unsee them. But people like Colin Drake never notice the ones holding the beams together. They only see ceilings, titles, spotlights. And because I didn't chase any of those, they assumed I had no ambition. They were wrong. Ambition doesn't always roar. Sometimes it writes clean code. Sometimes it balances impossible budgets. Sometimes it takes every rejection and files it away quietly, patiently, until the time is right. On Monday afternoon, I sat down with William Crane and Julia Myers in a private meeting room near Bryant Park. No fancy building, just clarity and purpose. "Everything's in place," William said, sliding a thin stack of papers across the table. "This is the notice of special shareholder meeting. Single agenda item executive leadership review, including the position of chief executive officer." "Colin won't see it coming," Julia added. "He's already planning Q4 presentations. He thinks your story is over."
"That's exactly what I want him to think," I said.
I signed the notice with one stroke. Julia nodded once. "Meeting is set for Tuesday at 10. We'll serve notice Friday morning." William leaned forward. "This will trigger a lot of things, Adrian. You ready?" "I've been ready for 5 years," I said. "I just didn't have the key until now." That night, I went through old files stored in a locked cabinet at home. Handwritten notes from team members, performance reports, feedback I'd collected from every department head, even when no one asked me to. I had kept it all. Not to hold a grudge, but to keep a record of what mattered. People. Not just the star performers, the overlooked ones. The interns who stayed late to reformat client decks. The junior engineers whose code got rewritten and credited to someone else. The receptionists who remembered birthdays, managed chaos, and never asked for credit. Colin never saw them. To him they were background noise. But I saw them because I was one of them. And now I was about to make sure they were never invisible again. On Friday morning, the legal notice was sent to the board of directors. Official. Irrevocable. It landed in their inboxes like any other meeting invite, subject line, calm content explosive. By noon, the buzz had begun. Colin didn't say anything publicly, but I could imagine his confusion. Maybe even panic. He'd built his image around being untouchable, calculated. Smiling in photos, charming in meetings, ruthless behind closed doors. He used corporate language like a shield. He thought strategy was about noise. I knew better. Strategy is structure, timing, pressure applied in silence until the cracks appear. By late afternoon, I received a message from Zoe Tran, someone I once mentored on the client support team. She'd grown into a brilliant systems thinker, but had been passed over 3 times for promotion. "Hey," her message read. "I heard something's coming. Don't know what. But if you're involved, thank you." I typed, then deleted a reply. I didn't need to say anything. She'd see it soon enough. That evening, I stood on the rooftop of my building looking out over the city that never really sleeps. Altair's tower was visible in the distance. Tall, slick, hollow at the top. By this time Tuesday, it would finally mean something again. Not just height, not just glass, but purpose. You don't announce power. You prepare it. And when the moment comes, you don't raise your voice. You raise the room. Power doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears a quiet suit and walks in early. The night before the meeting, I laid out the navy blue vest I'd bought 2 years ago. Still pressed. Still waiting. I never wore it. Never had the occasion. But I always knew what it was for. Not weddings, not photos. This. I ran my fingers over the fabric. Clean, sharp. Tailored to fit a man who never asked for power but had earned it anyway. I looked at my reflection. The man staring back wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even proud. He was prepared. I rehearsed the words I planned to say, not a speech, just a few lines. Truth doesn't need poetry. It just needs space. I didn't want to storm in. I wanted to arrive. When I arrived at the building that Tuesday morning, the lobby was already moving. Suits, coffee cups, elevator chimes. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I belonged here even if some had forgotten it. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the top floor. As the doors closed, I exhaled slowly. 10 floors, 10 seconds. 10 years of patience, hurt, progress, silence, resilience. The elevator opened to the executive level. William was waiting near the boardroom doors. Calm, composed binder in hand, he gave me a single nod. "They're all inside. Colin's already talking. He thinks it's the Q4 strategy review." "Let him finish," I said. "Then I'll start." William opened the door. The room was full. Board members, legal counsel, department heads. The usual lineup of pressed suits and restless pens. And Colin Drake standing at the head of the table like he always did, center stage in a show no one bought tickets for. When he saw me, his sentence trailed off. Adrian, he said, surprise barely concealed. This meeting is for board members only. I stepped forward and placed the ownership documents on the table. Exactly, I replied. Then I pulled out a chair and took my place at the head of the table. Silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that recognizes a shift has happened and no one can unshift it. Colin stared, confused, off balance for the first time in years. This is a private strategy meeting, he tried again. I'm not here as an employee, I said calmly. I'm here as the majority shareholder. A ripple moved across the table. Mr. Harold Beckett, one of the oldest board members, adjusted his glasses and looked at the document I had placed in front of him. Is this accurate? He asked. It is, I said. 90% of the company's founder shares were transferred to me via family trust. All paperwork is in order. Voting rights activated as of last Friday. William handed copies to the rest of the board. Colin's voice went up his signature move when control slipped. This is absurd. Why would your father? Because he trusted me, I said, cutting him off. And because he knew what this company would become without oversight. The room was still again. Everyone understood what I meant. They didn't need me to say it outright. Since my father's death, Colin had turned a values-driven company into a vanity-driven culture. One built on intimidation, favoritism, and optics. I've called this special shareholder meeting. I continued to conduct a review of current executive leadership, specifically the role of Chief Executive Officer. Colin stood now red in the face. This is a coup, a personal vendetta. You think you can just waltz in here and... I'm not asking, I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through his. I'm exercising my rights. Then I slid the financial report across the table. Declining employee satisfaction, rising turnover, stagnant revenue despite a growing market, 3 discrimination complaints under legal review, unauthorized travel expenses, excessive executive bonuses, and a dozen other data points all signed off under Colin's leadership. I'm not twisting data, I said. I'm revealing it. The room shifted. Mr. Beckett looked genuinely disturbed. The CFO leaned toward legal, whispering furiously. This isn't over, Colin said. You'll regret this. No, I said, standing. I'll correct this. I pulled out the final document. I hereby submit a motion to remove Colin Drake as Chief Executive Officer effective immediately. As majority shareholder, my vote carries the motion. The board secretary blinked. You don't need a second. I own 90%, I said. I am the majority. Mr. Beckett cleared his throat. Motion stands per company bylaws. Colin looked like he wanted to yell. He didn't, because deep down he knew. Security wasn't called. He left on his own. And in that moment, for the first time since my father died, the company was free. You don't rebuild with noise. You rebuild with people, and I knew exactly where to start. They removed me with a cardboard box. I returned with a blueprint. By the time Colin's nameplate was taken down from the CEO's door, I had already made my first decision. I wasn't moving in, not yet. Power isn't about claiming space. It's about knowing where to begin. And I knew exactly where that was. The following Monday, I called for an all-staff meeting. Same conference hall where Colin once boasted projections like he was unveiling masterpieces. Where praise was political and real work went unnoticed. But today the energy was different. People entered slowly, quietly. The front rows were empty, like no one wanted to seem too eager. Some were nervous, others skeptical. I didn't blame them. They had been burned before. I stood at the front, no stage, no slides, no podium. Just me, just truth. Most of you know who I am. I began, voice steady. Some of you only know what you've been told. I let that sit for a second. I was fired last month, I said plainly. Told I wasn't what this company needed, that I lacked vision, that I managed spreadsheets, not people. There were a few nervous chuckles in the back, but tension began to soften. I didn't fight it, I continued, because I knew something they didn't. I knew leadership isn't volume. It's not vanity. It's not about titles or who talks the most in meetings. I scanned the room, engineers, assistants, analysts, people who had worked 10 times harder for half the credit. Leadership, I said, is about vision. It's about respect. It's about lifting the people who build the foundation and giving them the tools to build higher. Silence, but not uncomfortable silence. They were listening. I ended with something simple. Starting today, things will be different. Not louder, not flashier. Just better. For the next 2 weeks, I did something Colin never dared to. I listened. I met with every department head, team leads, interns, the woman who managed the reception desk, the man who restocked the vending machines, the junior staffers who carried departments on their backs while someone else took credit. I didn't take notes for optics. I took notes because I needed to understand what they needed and what they had survived. Then I started acting. I promoted Zoe Tran, quiet genius, from client support into head of client experience. She'd unofficially been doing the job for a year while her manager attended leadership seminars and copied her work. I brought back Darren from product, one of our best minds. He had resigned 2 months ago after being passed over in favor of someone louder, flashier, less capable. I called him myself. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Completely," I said. He was back the next morning. I read every unresolved complaint buried in HR folders. The ones that didn't have enough evidence, the ones marked pending indefinitely. 3 mid-level managers were quietly let go within a week. Not as an act of vengeance, as a reset. Then I launched something my father once dreamed of, the People First Initiative. Not a PR campaign, a real shift. Internal awards for innovation, promotions based on peer review, equity and access in voice and growth. No more whisper networks, no more politics. Just good people finally seen. And slowly the office started changing. Desks had color again, plants, family photos. The break room filled with sound, laughter, music, life. People stayed late not out of fear but out of pride. You could feel it in the air, like the company had exhaled for the first time in years. Late one evening, I passed by the whiteboard outside engineering. Someone had scribbled in blue marker. He came back. 3 words, underlined twice. Not he took over, not he fired Colin. Just he came back. That meant more than any title. The following week, I finally stepped into the CEO's office, not to claim it, but because it was time. The desk was the same, the view too. What changed were the photos on the walls. Not stock art, not abstract nothingness, but faces, our people, our teams. Moments where effort turned into impact. And behind my chair, one framed image, my father's smiling hand on my shoulder. I didn't sit down like a king, I sat like a builder, ready to begin again. A company isn't made by glass and metal, it's made by hands, and finally those hands were seen. Spreadsheets tell you revenue, they never tell you respect. For a company that once prided itself on metrics, Altair never tracked what truly mattered. It tracked margins, not morale. Growth curves, not gratitude. Conversion rates, but never the cost of silence. Colin's reports were always clean. Crisp graphs, smiling numbers, as if the truth could be manipulated with a pie chart and a confident voice. But behind every line item was a story we stopped listening to. Until now. I spent the next week reviewing not revenue but records. I didn't want filtered summaries. I wanted the raw data, the quiet truths buried beneath flash drives and forgotten folders. I started with exit interviews. People who'd left not because they lacked skill, but because they'd been invisible. One line from an intern's form hit me like a punch. I worked 80 hours a week and no one knew my name. Another from a former project manager. Every time I spoke up, someone louder took credit. Eventually, I stopped speaking. These weren't complaints. They were symptoms. We hadn't just lost talent, we'd lost faith. So I started writing down names not just for rehiring, but for restoring. Some of those names I'd never met in person, but their impact had fingerprints all over our best campaigns, smoothest product launches, happiest clients. They were the ones who'd made magic behind closed doors, and it was time to open those doors. I personally called 6 people who'd left under Colin's regime. 4 returned, not because of me, but because of what I promised to rebuild. A company that remembered, that valued work, not just volume, that measured contribution, not just charisma. I met with the head of HR, Martha, a good woman who had been silenced into survival mode under the old system. "Martha," I said, "I want every complaint reopened. Everyone." She blinked. "All of them?"
Yes.
She paused. "That's over 300 reports." "I know," I replied. "Start with the ones no one ever followed up on. I'll help read them myself." That night I stayed late. Not in the CEO office, but in the archives room. Surrounded by files, dust, and paper trails of pain. I read everything. I underlined patterns. I saw who had been protected, who had been punished. I started forming a map. By the end of the week, 3 more toxic managers were gone. 2 were given a chance to correct course with oversight and mentorship. Not everyone needed to be exiled. Some needed to be re-educated. Culture is not just who you fire. It's also who you teach and who you empower. On Friday, I launched the first session of Voices Unfiltered, an anonymous internal platform where staff could safely share what had never been heard. Within 72 hours, it was flooded. Some stories were heartbreaking. Some were infuriating. But all of them mattered. They reminded me that for all our software systems tech, we had become disconnected from what we built it for. People. One message unsigned brought me to stillness. I used to cry in the bathroom before meetings. Now I walk in with a notebook and an idea. I'm not afraid anymore. Thank you. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I needed validation, but because I remembered why I was here.
Not to lead a company.
To restore a culture. To remind the forgotten that they weren't the problem. And now the system was changing. They built a wall between leadership and labor. I took the elevator down. Respect doesn't echo from the top floor. It rises from the ground up. When I took over as CEO, no one expected me to walk into finance, or engineering, or the cafeteria. But I did. And I didn't walk in with an entourage. I walked in with questions, with coffee and time. Colin never visited the 5th floor, the one where support staff sat in low chairs under fluorescent lights, where no windows opened, where the servers hummed like background noise nobody noticed. But that floor kept the company alive. It's where Zoe Tran once rewrote our broken client escalation system in a weekend while her manager took a 2-hour lunch and later called it a team effort. It's where Jamie from IT fixed a silent bug that could have cost us $2 million in data leaks, and no one even sent him an email afterward. It's where Sienna, just 2 years out of college, built a user experience prototype so elegant our clients thought we hired an outside agency. No one ever thanked them. I did. I started with a simple desk visit. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet hello, a name remembered, how's your workload this week? Some looked confused. Some looked afraid. Because leadership had never sat on their floor before unless it was to fire someone. One day I brought in a box of croissants and set them down in the break area with a note. Thank you for building what they forgot to see. I didn't sign it. They knew who it was. It wasn't about the pastry. It was about presence. You can't lead what you won't walk through. You can't ask people to give their best if they believe no one ever sees it. So I kept walking. Every floor. Every corner. Sometimes I sat at empty desks just to feel what their space felt like. The low buzz of servers, the faint scent of reheated coffee, the white noise of people who mattered doing work that moved mountains. When I returned to my office each night, I didn't take notes on operations. I took notes on people, on potential, on ideas buried under years of dismissal, and I started surfacing them. I emailed department heads with questions like, why is Daniel still a junior developer when half our UI is based on his framework? Why hasn't Layla presented at a product summit yet? Does Brian in IT want a shot at a security analyst role? I read his code audit. It's brilliant. And slowly floors started blending. Titles didn't erase identity. They enhanced it. The wall between leadership and labor was falling. And nobody missed it. That Friday I held a company-wide AMA Ask Me Anything. Not pre-screened. No filters. Just me sitting with a microphone reading questions on a screen as they rolled in live. Some were brutal. Why should we believe you're different? What's to stop this from being another empty promise? I didn't dodge. I said, you shouldn't believe me yet. Belief is earned, not claimed. Then one final question came in. What floor do you think is the most important in this building? I smiled, and I answered, whichever one you're on right now. The room went quiet. Not stunned, seen. They promoted voices they agreed with. I promoted the ones they ignored. In every ignored idea, there was a revolution waiting to happen. You don't fix a broken culture by replacing the top. You fix it by amplifying the bottom. That's what Colin never understood. He promoted people who echoed him. I promoted people who challenged me. Because real leadership isn't afraid of being wrong. It's afraid of staying blind. The first promotion I signed off on didn't go to the loudest voice in the room. It went to Natalie Ramos, quiet, observant, thoughtful. She'd spent 3 years in the research division gathering insight others had ignored. Her reports were clean, cautious, and usually intercepted by her manager, who reworded her insights to sound more visionary. I called her into my office. She looked nervous. Her eyes darted to the floor like she was bracing for critique. "Natalie," I said, "you've been leading without a title for years. I'm just fixing the title." She didn't say anything at first, then just a whisper. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone noticed." "I did," I replied. "You weren't invisible. They were just unworthy of your light." I offered her the position of Director of Strategic Insight. She accepted, with steady hands and a steady heart. Within a week, our insight models tripled in depth. She wasn't loud. She was brilliant, and now she was heard. Then there was Brandon. He worked in facilities. On paper, he fixed chairs. Light fixtures helped with moving desks. But one night, I found him sketching on a notepad during his break. Designs, flowcharts, UX wireframes better than half the consultants we'd ever hired. "You draw?" I asked. "Just ideas," he said, embarrassed. I like thinking how things could work better. 2 weeks later, he was in the product department with a mentor, a title, and a desk of his own. He still fixed chairs when he wanted to, but now he was also helping build the future. I wasn't promoting pity cases. I was promoting overlooked genius, the kind that makes companies unbreakable. We held the first internal people's pitch night. Anyone from any level could present a 5-minute idea. No slides, no politics, just pure thought. The winning pitch came from Priya, a front desk associate. She proposed a new onboarding system that would cut training time by 40% while improving retention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just saw the cracks. We implemented her idea within a month, saved thousands, gained millions in morale. She now heads our employee experience team. In her first week, she rewrote the entire orientation manual. In her second, she was asked to speak on a panel about cultural transformation in tech companies. The audience applauded, not because she was polished, because she was real. That's what they never measured in our old system. The real ones. The thinkers behind the curtains. The doers in the dark. The minds who never got coffee orders because they were the ones making them. Now! They were building the company, and it was working. Better retention, better innovation, better humans. All because we stopped pretending titles equaled talent. I passed a whiteboard near engineering again that week. Someone had written, "Turns out the quiet ones weren't quiet. They were just never asked." Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you rebuild when no one else will. Some names are printed for power. Others are etched in purpose. I passed the CEO office door twice before I opened it. The nameplate had changed a week ago. Brushed steel, simple font, clean. Adrian Keane, Chief Executive Officer. No title had ever felt heavier, and yet it fit like something I'd worn all my life. I stood there for a moment, hand on the handle, remembering the old plaque that used to be there, my father's name. Thomas Vale, founder. I used to trace those letters when I was a kid. Back then, I thought the door was magic, that only the strongest men could walk through it. Now I knew better. It wasn't magic, it was memory and responsibility. I stepped in. Nothing had changed since I last saw it except the walls. No more abstract art or generic industry awards. Now the walls held photos. Real ones. Our people, our moments, team wins, personal growth, stories and snapshots. And directly behind the desk framed in walnut wood was a single photo. My father and me. Opening day. I was maybe 10. My tie was crooked. He was laughing. Not the laugh you give investors. The one you save for someone you love. That photo wasn't for the room. It was for me, to remember what this was really about. My father didn't build Altair for shareholders. He built it for humans. He used to say, "We don't hire employees. We invite architects, people who shape something bigger than a paycheck." He believed in structure, yes, but more than that, he believed in soul. When he passed, I tried to keep that soul alive. Quietly, steadily. But Colin drained it out of the halls one policy at a time. Stripped the culture for polish. Rewarded echo chambers over evolution. And I let it happen. Because I thought legacy was something you protected. Now I understood. Legacy isn't protection. Legacy is correction. It's the courage to rebuild what someone else destroyed. Not for glory, for grace. That afternoon, I called a private meeting with the founding board. The same group who had once voted Colin in, Some of them looked older, some ashamed, all of them curious. "Why did you bring us in?" Mr. Beckett asked. I placed a slim binder in front of them. No labels, no fluff. Just a plan. To enshrine new leadership values into our bylaws. To create a formal channel for employee feedback to the board. To set diversity targets not for optics but for output. To ban any executive bonus disconnected from team-based performance. And finally, to rename our mentoring program after my father, the Thomas Vale Fellowship. Adrian, one board member, said, scanning the binder, "This isn't policy. This is a philosophy." "Exactly," I said, "because without values, strategy is just noise." They approved it, unanimously. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, I sat alone at the desk. No fanfare, no press release. Just me and the name on the door. It wasn't a trophy. It was a promise. You don't honor the past by repeating it. You honor it by repairing what it couldn't finish. They thought they buried me, but they didn't know I was the seed. It had been exactly 1 year, 12 months to the day since I walked out of this building with a cardboard box and a calm smile, fired by a man who thought power came from the ability to erase people. Colin never raised his voice that day. He didn't need to. He used tone. He used performance. He used the kind of cold authority that tells you without saying it that you don't belong. And I remember walking out of that glass tower into the New York wind feeling not broken, lighter. Because what he never knew, what no one knew, was that I didn't walk out empty. I walked out armed, with the truth, with a trust, with a legacy in my pocket and a plan already forming. They thought they'd cut me out of the story, but I was the story. They just hadn't read far enough. I didn't burn with revenge. I burned with readiness. The kind of fire that doesn't explode. The kind that builds. Each night after that, I lit small matches, plans, documents, meetings, audits, quiet corrections in the dark. And by the time I walked back into that boardroom, I didn't need to raise my voice. I was the voice. Now, a year later, the fire is still here, but it's changed. It no longer burns to prove something. It burns to protect something. This company, its people, its values. I don't need to stand over anyone anymore. I walk beside them. The interns, the engineers, the receptionists, the veterans. We sit at the same table now. And that fire, it's in them too. You can see it in how they speak up, take risks, create without fear of being ignored. In how they share the credit. In how they stay late not out of fear, but pride. That's the difference between a fire that consumes and a fire that connects. Colin used his fire to burn bridges. I use mine to light paths. Paths for people like Natalie, Brandon, Zoe, Priya. People who were once told in 1,000 subtle ways that they were not quite ready. Turns out they were ready the whole time. They just needed the system to stop lying. I don't think much about Colin anymore. He hasn't returned. He hasn't apologized. And I'm okay with that. Because this story was never about him. It was about us. The quiet ones. The steady ones. The overlooked, underestimated, and undercelebrated. The ones who kept showing up even when no one clapped. We are the fire they couldn't kill. They thought leadership was the end of a ladder. I made it a circle. And we walked it together. They called it a ladder. We made it a circle. No one stands alone anymore. 1 year, 12 months, 365 days since I walked out of this building is not what the company needed. Now I stand at the same glass doors, same suit, same city. But everything else is different. Because I'm not here to take back power. I already did that. I'm here to pass it forward. The security guard nods when I walk in. "Morning, Mr. Vale." Adrian, I correct him, smiling. Always Adrian. Upstairs, the energy has changed. The elevators don't feel like a status symbol anymore. Just a connector floor to floor, person to person. I walk through each department the same way I used to as an analyst, asking questions, making notes, listening deeply. Only now they ask me questions back. Real ones. Can we pitch a new onboarding model? Would you review our UX proposal? Do you think I'm ready for a leadership role? And every time I answer, not from the top, but from beside them. Because this job, this title, this office, none of it means anything if I don't bring others through the door behind me. That's what my father meant when he said, "Legacy isn't a monument, it's a map." So I drew one. We created a mentorship loop where executives are assigned not just mentees, but reverse mentors from different floors, departments, backgrounds. We dismantled the echo chambers. We removed the gatekeepers. We built open forums where ideas aren't filtered by status, but elevated by substance. And slowly, it started to look like the company I think my father dreamed of. I kept his photo on my desk not as a memory but as a reminder. Not to follow his footsteps, but to expand them. On the anniversary of his passing, I stood in front of the full company, now over 700 people strong. Not to give a speech, but to share a story. I told them about the day he opened our first office in Queens, the way he remembered every janitor's name, the way he asked his assistant to speak before him during planning meetings, the way he once stayed after hours just to help someone restock supply closets because, quote, "No one's job is smaller than mine." And then I told them what he told me when I was 10. If you ever find yourself in charge, son, make sure no one feels like they don't belong in the room. I looked out at that crowd. Engineers, frontline staff, former interns now running departments. And I realized we did it. We built the circle. There was no longer a top and a bottom. There was only forward. And the next step wasn't mine to take alone. I handed the mic to Maya, once in support, now head of client experience. She spoke with conviction, humor, insight. And when she finished, I didn't speak again. I sat, I listened. Because leadership isn't just about being heard. It's about making room. That afternoon, I walked past the same hallway where I once saw someone had written in blue marker. He came back. Someone had updated it. Now it read, he stayed, he listened. We rose. I stopped and smiled. Not for pride, but for peace. Because in the end, I didn't reclaim a throne. I didn't burn a kingdom. I rebuilt a circle. And every hand inside it knows they belong. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of reminder. That power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, listens, lifts. And when leadership chooses integrity over intimidation, everything changes. If you believe in that kind of leadership, share this story. Not just for those at the top, but for those who never stopped showing up even when no one clapped. You are not invisible. You are the reason we rise.